I heard it. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Cody Smith, and I am sober and saved by the grace and mercy of a loving God. And I learned that here. Um, January 3rd, 2011 is my sobriety date. That means I'm coming up on 13 years of sobriety, God willing. I'm sure that doesn't impress a lot of you, but it impresses the heck out of me, you know. At 35 when I got sober, the last time I had been sober for anything like 90 days, the police were involved, and so it took a power greater than myself to separate me from alcohol at that point, when I was about 20. And I wouldn't have chosen sobriety, so I definitely, if the drinking and the other non-conference approved substances were still working for me, I'd still be doing them, because I'm what you call a settler. I'm definitely a half measures guy. And I'm always looking for the softer, easier way. And for me, that was intoxication. It lowered the bar for me, which I liked, because bars are hard to reach. They told me as a kid that I had a lot of potential. There was a lot of conferences, a lot of parent teacher conferences. All right, I don't want to get any momentum build up here and start taking this thing in the direction that I want to take it in. I'm gonna take a moment. I'm gonna take a few deep breaths, because my third step says that I'm to be a channel. I'm to be a vessel, and I'm to carry the message that God wants me to carry. And I just felt myself getting out over my skis. So I'm going to take a couple deep breaths. I'm going to say a little prayer. For myself. And I'm going to say a prayer for all of you as well. And when I got nervous, I told my sponsor, I'm nervous about talking. He said, just repeat these words. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your eyes. And that's what I'm here for. So I got an hour, 50 minutes, 48 left, I think. And that's a lot of time for me. I'm a responder. I like going to meetings. I like listening to what other people share. I like having my imagination fired. The big book tells me that'll happen. I like catching inspiration and listening to people and listening to what they're going through and listening to how I can identify with that and listening for opportunities where I might be able to step in and help out. And I learned all that in Alcoholics Anonymous, but that is certainly not the kind of person I was when I showed up here. I'm sure that the desire to do that lived in me somewhere. But it was definitely crowded out by my desire to drink and rip and run and to be selfish. And I lived a life under the delusion that I can wrest satisfaction and happiness from this world if I only managed well. And that did not stop the day I got sober, I'll tell you that much. So here, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. So I hit a major spiritual bottom in like my 8th and 9th year sober, at which time I was like, I'm gonna jump all around because that's what I do. I was really confident in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was really confident with my position in Alcoholics Anonymous. I loved giving AA talks, I love telling people what to do. I love beating people up with the big book and beating people up with the steps and beating people up with, I weaponized that big book, and I liked it, man. I would just go into meetings and I would tear people apart, and not that necessarily that in and of itself is a bad thing, but my motivation was a little off, and so I am, approaching 13 years of sobriety. In the last 3 years since I hit that bottom and things shifted, is like I feel really new again. And so with all this time that I have to speak to you, I think it's, well, I don't know what's important anymore. You know what I mean? Like, I used to know what was important. I used to really know what parts of my story you needed to hear. I used to know what parts of my story I needed to talk about. And anymore, I'm questioning it all. Like I'm guessing that the most important parts of my story I haven't even uncovered yet, because I've been doing this, telling my story and Alcoholics Anonymous thing for, like I said, almost 13 years. And there's something that's occurred to me in the last couple of months that I think might be more important than anything I've ever shared in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so as these things are, I mean, it tells us that on page 64, right? Like more will be revealed, we only know a little. So I'm just coming to you as a guy who only knows a little. And I know enough, whatever that means, to have stayed sober for as long as I've stayed sober, because I've seen countless people drink again. I've seen countless people with more time than me drink again, or start taking medication, or worse than that, commit suicide. And so I can't completely discredit what I do know. But I also have to give all credit to God. And it took me almost 10 years to understand what grace was. I knew what it was to hit bottom. Oh, so I grew up in this alcohol friendly house. I was born at Purdue University Hospital in West Lafayette, Indiana, where both of my parents were Boilermakers, and they finished up. I don't ever remember living there. I just know that's where I was born, and they moved to Florida. And my first crib was the bottom drawer of the dresser. That's how, I'm just saying, that's how prepared they were to be parents, and it was a crazy house. These were people who should not have gotten married. They did the best they could. They did not make me an alcoholic, but my dad ended up drinking himself to death. And I have a pretty darn good relationship with my mom today, but it was chaos. I grew up in chaos. I created a lot of chaos. I got kicked out of a lot of schools. for stealing, for fighting, um, for drinking and other stuff. Got sent to Valley Forge Military Academy. I ran away from there. I went AWOL. At one point they were desperate, and I think now I have a 15-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son, and so I'm thinking there's a lot of times today when I'm desperate, and they're good kids. So recently I've come to understand, like, I made my amends with my mom, but as I lose sleep over what my 15-year-old daughter's going through, I realize I'm starting to see what I put my mom through a lot more clearly. And my 15-year-old daughter is an angel compared to what I was getting into. But anyways, they sent me to this boys' home. This is the thing that I thought that I never really thought was significant, that today I'm thinking might have been a significant event in my life. So they sent me to this boys' home that was run by a Baptist preacher. There was 6 of us. It was in Wausauke, Wisconsin. It was like 2 hours north of Green Bay. And listen, it was like the most religious place on earth. It was like 5:30 in the morning, devotions, and reading the Bible all the time, and going. And anytime they would take us to church, I would, they'd stop at the gas station. I'd be stealing cigarettes, and I'd be sneaking off into the woods, and I'd be smoking cigarettes in the woods. And I was just, if you're familiar with geography, I'm just going to tell you, 2 hours north of Green Bay, Wisconsin is the middle of nowhere, and they sent me there because I ran away from military school, and you can't run away from 2 hours north of Green Bay, Wisconsin. There's just, you'll die out there. And anyways, it was a crazy time. I think I was 13 or 14 years old. And right before the school year ended, we went on a mission trip to Mexico. And while we were on this mission trip in Mexico, I had a great time. I had a great time. We built an adobe brick schoolhouse, and we would drive around to these neighborhoods, and we would pass out these little, like, gospel comic books called tracts. Now listen, most of this stuff I thought was ridiculous, and I had a huge problem with religion, and I would be like, I had a hard time wrapping my mind around the idea that we were coming to offer these people salvation, right? Like, they needed us to offer them salvation, like as if we had something for them that they didn't have. And I thought that's great, but we would pull up to these, like, completely impoverished neighborhoods, and like these packs of the happiest children you've ever seen in your life, like, sneakerless, running through the dirt in their bare feet, with, you could tell, like, the only pair of clothing that they owned they were just coming, and they were so happy, and I just thought it was like, I don't know, I had a hard time figuring out how it seemed like they had something that they definitely had something that I didn't have. They were content in their situation, and I wasn't. And so I was wrestling with that deal back then. But we built this adobe brick schoolhouse, and there was, like, a lot of camaraderie, and it was very It was very spiritually nurturing. I wouldn't have described it that way back then. I certainly didn't have that kind of language, but at the end of it, they did something that I wasn't familiar with. I mean, I am now, but they did something. I guess it's referred to as an altar call. You know, they were like they invited us. You know, listen, the six most unlikely prospect, you know, teenage boys, you know, that they asked us if they basically asked us if we wanted to take the third step, you know, they're like, do you want to turn your will and your life over to the care of God, you know? And I mean, they didn't use that language, but that was essentially what they asked us to do. And you want to know what's crazy? Is I had a deep desire to answer that call. You know, like today I know what that is. But back then, you know, 35 years ago, I had a deep desire to answer that call. And I was like, yes, I want to do this. This is amazing. Like I was really respecting, you know, these missionaries and what they were pouring their lives into. And some part of me knew that my life would be a lot more manageable if it looked like that. And if I was pursuing what these guys were doing, these guys and gals, versus, you know, the messes that I was making with my life doing what I was doing. So my first thought was, yes, you should answer this call. But then the other voice came in, you know, and that's that's my problem, is the other voice always comes in, you know, and the other voice came in and it said, Cody, you're a Miami Vice guy. You like fast cars and you like fast boats and you like the nightlife and you like women in bikinis. And I don't see how all the things that you like are going to fit into this like missionary lifestyle. These things don't seem compatible. And I thought about this school that I was likely going to have to go back to the following year, because they weren't going to take me back at this boys' home. And so I was going to get another shot at the local public school that I had spent a few weeks in prior to getting kicked out. That's the thing about the public schools, is they always have to take you back. You know, it's like they can kick you out, but your parents pay taxes there. They got to let you come back like the following year, you know? And so I was thinking about the handful of kids that I had met, and I thought, what are they going to think of you? You know, what are they going to think of you? I know what they're going to think of you if you're like a Miami Vice guy. They're going to think you're pretty cool. They're going to want to hang out with you, you know, if you're into the cars and the boats and the bikinis and the parties, like that stuff's cool. You'll have a lot of friends there. If you're a 14, 15-year-old kid, like heading into this school and you're like into the missionary thing, you're like into the God thing. If you took the third step and you gave your will and your life to God, like you're not going to make a lot of friends that way. This is what the voice in my head is saying, you know? And so, I mean, the fact that I'm here telling you all this at 48, coming up on 49 years old, and I'm just now figuring out, you know, that might have been a significant event in my life. You know, and that might be funny to you. I'm just a little slow on the uptake, you know. I'm thinking that might have been a fork in the road. Um, but but thank God he allowed me to come to that fork again, you know. And so I continued, you know, on that Miami Vice road. You know, that was the road I chose. And the drinking and the carrying on and the flushing my athletic potential, my academic potential down the toilet, continued. And by 20 years old, I was a convicted felon. You know, I didn't, it was because I was an entrepreneur. I was a convicted felon for being an entrepreneur, but it just wasn't legal. I wasn't like a bank robber with guns and things like that. I just was always looking for the softer, easier way. I wasn't real big on going to work. I liked it when the work came to me. Unfortunately, that caught up to me. And I didn't learn much. I'm a slow learner. So anyways, I was in a long-term relationship with this gal, and I'm gonna skip over right now about 15 years of madness, because the big book's real simple. It says over any considerable period we get worse, never better. That's my story. 15 years of getting worse, never better. Occasionally something would happen to feed the delusion, that like, oh, okay, I got this. It's going to get better. It's getting better. Tomorrow will be different. And if something didn't feed the delusion, I don't think I needed anything. That's the deal with delusion, is like, the house could be burning around you, and you're like, hey, somebody turn the AC down, will you? It's like, it just doesn't make sense. But I had this gal and I, we got married. And we had a baby girl, and we hated each other. This gal and I, not the baby girl. She loved us. We loved her to the best of our ability. I swore I'd never be like my dad. I swore I'd never raise kids in the house that I grew up in, and that's what I was able to see, is that I had become my dad, and that violent, abusive household that I grew up in was the house that I was raising this baby girl in. And then my wife got pregnant with our second child, and at some point suicide became the only option for me. The booze didn't work anymore. The other stuff didn't work anymore. It couldn't get me there. It couldn't block out the truth of where my life was going, which was a collision course with divorce, and I was going to be separated from my wife and from my at the time 2-year-old daughter, and my on the way son, and my wife was a catch, and I had great kids, and another one on the way, and she wasn't going to stay single, so I was going to have to live in a van down by the river and watch this woman, marry some other guy, and watch some other guy raise my kids. And I swallowed a lot of pills, along the way, literally and proverbially, but that was the pill I couldn't swallow. That was the thing I couldn't watch happen, and I didn't see a way out. So I went, it was a blizzard in 2010, and I took a tent and a sleeping bag out into the woods in a blizzard. And I was like the guy. I was like the guy in the big book. Went out to a barn, waited to die. You know, and while I was out there, I realized fear in a way that I hadn't previously realized fear. And I surrendered to it. See, I was in New Jersey. Well, the woods that I went into were in Pennsylvania, but I mean, I don't know if you've ever been in the woods in a snowstorm. Well, first of all, our neighbors had seen a bear in their yard. There was like increased bear sightings in December of 2010, October, November, December of 2010, where I was. And I don't know if you've ever been in the woods during a snowstorm, but what happens is, the branches, the trees, they freeze up, and then they collect as much snow as they can until the branch snaps from the weight of the snow, and then it releases, like, it could be 100 pounds of snow or more, depending on how much. So I'm out in the middle of these woods in a blizzard in a tent, and I'm listening to these loud cracks and these loud thuds, and I know there's bears out there, and I know, like, this is the end for me, and I was really okay with it, and I looked up, and I wasn't a looker upper, and I talked to God, and I was not a guy who talked to God, and I just said, if I'm supposed to die, let me die out here tonight. And listen, I didn't know that was the first three steps, but it was. That's a that's about a that's about as good as the first three steps as I think you could take without knowing the first three steps. And so a few days later, I didn't die. Spoiler alert. And a few days later, I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous, because there was this weirdo who would he would always be like, we'd go out drinking, and he would always be there. He owned the local bike shop, and like, he hung out with a lot of us, and he was like this really nice guy, but he didn't drink, and like, he was sober. And I called him up, and I was like, hey Tom, I think I might need to go to one of those meetings. And he picked me up like 2 hours later and took me to my first meeting. And that was January of 2011, and by the grace of God, I never drank again. But I didn't know how to stay sober. I didn't know that sobriety was my problem. I mean, I figured a lot of these things out. I mean, you helped me. You're very patient. That's what I have to work on now, is being patient. But I did. They told me drinking isn't your problem, kid. Drinking's your solution. And I understood that, because there was a time when my daughter was about 9 months old, and I thought, hey, you should probably get sober. Sobriety might be a good idea for you. That occurred to me, and so I quit drinking. And by day 5, I made it 5 whole days. My wife looked at me. She was holding our 9-month-old daughter, and she looked at me with tears in her eyes, and she said, why are you doing this to us? Why are you doing this to us? Will you please just drink? Because that's what happens to me when I get sober. People want me to drink. I'm no fun. I'm not happy, joyous, and free. I'm restless, irritable, and discontented, until I can experience that thing again. So I understood, like drinking treats this thing that I have. At least it did for a long time, and if it still did, I'd still do it, but it stopped. So anyways, so I learned, I don't know. I was a blank slate. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a blank slate. I jumped in. I started doing everything they asked me. I was like a 3 or 4 meeting a day guy out of the gate. I don't know. Some people talked about 90 and 90. I went to like 240 in my first 90. Because in AA I felt safe and sane and protected, and outside of AA I felt like insane and unsafe, and I had no idea what to do with myself. And you all were like speaking this language, and there was like depth and weight and hope. And I was watching people and listening to people who thought the way I thought and felt the way I felt, and they were like staying sober, and they were like their families, they were enjoying their time with their families, and they were getting jobs, and they were having success in their communities, and like all this stuff that sounded amazing to me, so you gave me a lot of hope. You gave me the hope, and you told me to get busy, and you told me to stack chairs, and you told me to clean up the cigarette butts, and you told me to make coffee, and I did all of it. I did all that stuff. And when I was 30 days, they let me start putting my name on the clipboard that went around to go to the men's rehab and the treatment facility. I wasn't allowed to talk, but I was allowed to go. And so I was literally like going with, Ron the roofer and Jim Kett, and like I'm going with these guys, and they're talking about recovery on the way to the meetings, and we're getting there, and I'm like watching these young men like detox, and I'm sitting there detoxing, but then like my buddies are getting up and leaving, and I'm leaving with them, and all these other guys got to stay. It was like surreal to me, and I just got real into the AA deal, and I got a sponsor, and I worked the steps, and I read the book. I read the book all the time. I went to, I loved literature meetings. I loved the fundamentals. I love the fundamentals. I became like really religious about Alcoholics Anonymous, and that big book became my scripture, and if you weren't, Lord help you, if you weren't doing it right and you talked about it in a meeting that I was in, I would certainly let you know, because well, listen, there's a season for everything, right? And I definitely needed that season of well, in hindsight, what I realized is that that first step that I took, back in January of 2011, it was like a first half of the first step, like I was powerless. And I didn't understand unmanageability, which today, unmanageability for me is a spiritual unmanageability. And when you spend your entire life trying to like build up a material life and things don't work out for you, like it makes sense that you're like powerless. But how can you hit a spiritual bottom? How can you understand spiritual unmanageability if you never spent 1 second of one day trying to have a spiritual life? So I was pouring my heart and my soul into this Alcoholics Anonymous thing, trying to build a spiritual life, trying to make God the central fact of my life. And that's what it required for me to have that, to hit that spiritual bottom, and to realize that the big book says, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of living would have been sufficient, we would have recovered a long time ago. But what I did was I used Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous as a mere code of morals and a better philosophy of living. Like it was, I gave my actions, to the work. I gave my actions to the work. I did not give my heart to God, and there's a big difference. And so when I hit this spiritual bottom, God put a man in my life that had gone through the same exact thing that I did. He hit bottom at 10 years. And he suggested that there's more suggestions, And so I started taking some suggestions that I had never taken before. And everything changed. The sixth step talks about the separation between the men and the boys, and it talks about the difference being between the ones who settle for a limited self-determined objective and the ones who are willing to try repeatedly over a lifetime to grow in the image and likeness of their creator. And to be honest, I believed back in January of 2011 when God separated me from alcohol. I believed I was still a victim of the delusion. I didn't think I had any plans for my life. I didn't think that I had a limited self-determined objective. Things were bad, real bad, and were only going to get worse. And so to me, it made perfect sense that I wanted to commit suicide. But at 9 years sober, having a restored relationship with my wife, having a 15-year-old in private school, a 12-year-old son in private school who had never seen his father drink, cars paid for, living in a beautiful neighborhood and the nicest house I've ever lived in my life, with the respect of my peers and the respect of people in Alcoholics Anonymous, all this, I think the only way for me to find out I had a limited self-determined objective was to get there, and God allowed me to get there. And when I got there, I wanted to commit suicide. And that didn't make sense to me. That didn't make sense to me. And my sponsor said, maybe you're one of the rarelies, I'm like, what are you talking about? Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path, because I did everything. I was doing everything, And he said, he brought me to those things, those suggestions that I had passed off, and it opened my mind up a little bit more, because I thought I was like Captain AA, like GSR sponsoring. I would love going to my men's meeting on Wednesday night and sponsoring more guys in the room than anybody else. I was so proud, full of pride. I was all about using these 12 steps and knowing that big book inside and out, to glorify me. I didn't realize that the 12 steps were a treasure map. I thought they were the treasure. And that's where I got confused. It even talks about that in the 12 and 12. It says, like, we'll be as honest as we need to be to get what we want. We'll be as kind as we need to be to get what we want. And from a guy who was a liar, a cheater, a thief, always on the outside of the law, not playing by the rules. It didn't take much, kindness and honesty for things to go a lot freaking better in my life, but the big book says we're quick to see where religious people are right. We make use of what they offer. And I don't know. I had to come to terms with what happened on that mission trip when I was 13 or 14 years old. It all came back to that for me. It says in the big book, it says, for alcoholics who have derided religious people, you might find such affiliations helpful. Where I did the most deriding of religious people was in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I was spiritual, not religious. Like, I was better than those. They were just simple. Those religious folks were just simple. And I'm like a yoga teacher. And, I've got like the singing bowls, and I've got like the chakra ladders, and I'm teaching yoga classes, and I'm filling these rooms up, and people are coming to see me, and so, my spirituality is far better than those religious people, like myself, like, and I could not see my self-righteousness, and I thought between my spirituality and these 12 steps you all gave me, I was going to be able to save myself. I didn't think I was actually powerless. I certainly didn't think that there was one who had all power, which is what they were telling me it's what they were telling me when I was 13, 14 years old, and that's what they had to offer those little kids. It's like the one who has all power, and I just was not willing to explore that. I was not willing to go to church. The big book says we encourage church membership. It says even if you disagree with those people, you'll find new friends, new avenues of pleasure and service. It says you'll be a bright spot in the congregation because you got these preachers who give their all, and they don't see the kind of miracles on a regular basis that we experience here in Alcoholics Anonymous. The profundity of the miracles that we get to experience. Absolutely. About 3 years ago, when I decided to start, or I don't even like to say when I decided, about 3 years ago, when I was compelled, because I would have settled. I told you I'm a settler, at any point in this story, if what I was doing, if the drinking still worked, I'd still drink, if all I had to do was pick up cigarette butts and make coffee, and I could like be happy, joyous, and free, that's all I would do. I'm a guy who's only gonna do what I have to do. That's why there's only one warning in the big book. Not one warning, I'm sorry, one thing that they tell us is going to be easy: resting on our laurels. That's the only thing that the big book says is going to be easy, and that is definitely the only thing that's easy for me, is resting on my laurels. I'm only going to keep going as the 6th and 7th step talk about repeated humiliations and the final crushing of our self-sufficiency. I mean, the first step says under the lash of alcoholism. I came in under the lash. That's how I move. I need a lash to move. And, it is by circumstance rather than by virtue we are driven to AA. It's circumstance. It's like, I'm never going to just rightly choose to grow closer to God, to quit, to do battle with my flesh, like, because I'm a guy who just takes pleasure in the flesh, so it's going to have to hurt. The thorn's going to have to hurt real bad before I go, move a little farther to take it out. So, but what happened for me is I got to a point where I needed, what Bill Wilson said, right? He said, thus was I convinced that God comes to us, becomes interested in us humans when we want him enough. And like for me, that took almost 10 years of sobriety, and a really, for all intent and purpose, a really good life, a life that most people would look at and think I was crazy, for wanting to commit suicide. But my first bottom was a material bottom, and my second bottom was a spiritual bottom. And at one point, I was sitting in my kitchen by myself, and I had whatever. I mean, it was 10 years sober, and I had an intimate moment with God. And God let me know that it was God all the time. Basically, like, you had nothing to do with this. I did the work. I brought you here. you know uh and so I understood grace. Like, in that moment, I understood grace for the first time. um I was given sobriety, and now look at me. Like, now I'm back in Mexico, and I'm building adobe brick houses. And it turns out, like, you don't actually have to be in Mexico building adobe brick houses to be on the mission field, right? Because we got it right here in Alcoholics Anonymous, where the whole deal is about, finding a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem, and abandoning yourself to God, and making him the central fact of your life. And then we burn into the consciousness of every man that he can get well, as long as his reliance is on God. you know and so it got easy. Those first 8 or 9 years of doing the work, running on self-sufficiency. My life got a lot better, but it was really hard. And when I finally accepted the grace, when I finally accepted the grace of God, when I finally accepted that I was powerless, and that there was one who had all power, and that it was him all along, and I took my spot on the mission field, like, things just got a lot easier. And so I know less, I'm less certain, but it's a lot easier. So I owe it to the great men and women who have walked the road before me. The Alan Fishers, who took me under their wing and taught me, on Thursday nights for like 3 years. He would have me and 8 or 9 other guys at his house from like 6 p.m. to 9 or 10 p.m. And he taught me how to have relationships with men. And he told me that, the best relationship you're ever going to have with any woman is going to be dependent on the best relationship that you have with any man. And so he taught me intimacy, and I've been facilitating men's groups now for a long time, and I learned that from him. So I want to tell, I thought I had less time than I do. Somebody just said I have 7 minutes, but you know what? I had something happen. I'm going to tell just a short little story. It happened on Thursday. What's today? Saturday, a couple days ago. So I was driving my 15-year-old daughter was invited to go to the beach with a couple of friends. It was one of the gals' birthdays. And I picked her up from school, and I was driving her over there. We had a great time. Man, I love my daughter. She is amazing, but she scares the crap out of me because she's exactly like me. Except she's got a couple of sober parents, which is pretty cool because she really can't get anything by us. But I brought her over to her friend's house, and I was dropping her off, and she had her suitcase and she had her school bag because she was coming from school, and her friend and her friend's mom and the boy were standing there, and the brother. And we were doing the little transition thing and the handoff, and my daughter started to walk away without her backpack. And listen, it was a fun moment, right? She starts walking away without her backpack, and and I say, Maddie, aren't you going to take your backpack with you? And she was like, why would I do that? And I said, I don't know. Maybe while you're away, you can get that 12 that you have in Bible class up. Maybe you can get that 12 up. You know, and they chuckled. Right, there was a little like uncomfortable chuckle. And I kissed her and hugged her and I said goodbye. And as I started to drive away, I was convicted that, like, it was a little it wasn't very nice. It wasn't very nice that you and I was like, and I tried to tell that voice to go away, like leave me alone, whatever. It was a joke. Everybody laughed. And I drove a little farther and it was like, that really was not very nice. And so I stopped my truck and I backed up and I went back in the house and I knocked on the door and they were like, what's going on? I told the mom, I said, Laura, I need to talk to Maddie, and it'd be nice if the other kids were there. And I went and I pulled Maddie and Zoe and Trey, and I was like, you know what, Maddie, you are an amazing child, and it was really not nice to you. It was really not nice that the last thing your friends heard me say to you was, maybe you can get that 12 up, because you are just so much more than that one low grade that you have right now. And your friends need to hear me say how incredible of a person you are and how dynamic of a person you are and how lucky I am to have you as a father. And I just hope you have an amazing time on your trip. And they all kind of like, they looked at me a little funny or whatever, but I don't know. Like for me, that's sobriety, because I know a lot of people who aren't drinking, and I don't know. I want to be a person. I want to be a person who you want to be around. I want to be a person who, when you're done spending time with me, you feel better. And I hope that happened tonight. I hope you feel better having spent a little bit of time with me. And I'm really grateful that Phil invited me to share. Thank you so much. And I see I got a bunch of friends all around this place, and I love you all. And I hope that you found what I found here in Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's here. If you feel like you're still missing something, you probably are. Stick around. Thanks for letting me share.